Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, Story Changers, and welcome back to another episode of the Black Lives Matter series here on the Author Your Life podcast. Today's guest is Egbe Manton. Egbe is a corporate lawyer and commercial director of Manton Legal Consultancy. She's worked in a global law firm and has particular experience providing legal guidance to entrepreneurs and founders on contractual documentation, GDPR, and IP. She is passionate about providing simplified legal advice to enable entrepreneurs and founders to reach their business goals. In this interview today, you will learn that driven people aren't driven in all areas of their life, that you need to set red lines in order to maintain high performance, that sometimes listening is the solution to the problem, and that racism is both top down and bottom up. You're going to learn this and so much more in this interview with Egbe Manton.
But I did the usual route of going through uni and law school and all the rest of it to become a corporate lawyer. And I currently run a consultancy called Manton Legal Consultancy, and I help entrepreneurs and small businesses with their legal dilemmas.
Did you always want to be a lawyer, or was it something you fell into?
No, for me, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I think it went back right to 92, I think it was, and I was 7, and the event of Stephen Lawrence's murder happened, and that's the first time I had any sort of interaction with the justice system and tried to understand what it was all about. And it was the first time that I realised that the world wasn't fair, and I wanted to do something to do with law to try and change that, because I couldn't understand why all this stuff was happening and nobody was trying to change it, right? So I decided to then become a lawyer, and I've always had that in my head, and I've never changed, which is probably not great, but yeah, so that's why I went down that route.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to share a little bit more about what the Stephen Lawrence case was all about? I've actually forgotten about that, and I've only just remembered now you've said it, so I could probably use a refresher, and there might be some people who are completely unaware of it. So do you want to describe a little bit more detail about what that was about?
Yeah, sure. So this happened in the early 90s, and he was a young man, I would say. He was 18 and was walking home from a bus stop with his friend and in London, and he was attacked by a group of white youths, and was unfortunately killed in the incident. But following that, there were a number of police blunders and events that happened, which meant that his killers weren't brought to justice. So although we knew, or probably knew, who killed him, they weren't brought to justice, and only some of them were brought to justice years later. And I think that really had a bit of impact on me, because there was obviously the trial and the court case and the inquiry after that. And it was just every time I saw his mum or his dad or his family on TV, I just thought, this could happen to anybody. You could be in Edinburgh, or you could be in London or in Cardiff, and you're just doing something simple like walking home from a bus stop with your friend, which I've done several times, late at night, I might add. But you just don't expect to get killed in the UK, right? So for me, that was kind of like a shocking thing. I couldn't understand it just merely on the colour of someone's skin. I just didn't get it. And still don't.
Mm-hmm. So that was the catalyst of seeking justice, and you go into a law career. Do you feel that you are making a mark immediately?
No. when you start your law career, you're always at the bottom, right? You're like the runt. So basically everybody's like telling you to go photocopy stuff, or, you know, transcribe pages, or do, go get someone's coffee. So the visions that you have of like changing society doesn't really happen in the first couple of years of your career, because you're just learning your trade, right? You're trying to get as much knowledge as you can, and to really push forward on your career progression, right? But I think for what's always been important for me, regardless of what stage of my career I've been at, I've always wanted to pay it forward or give back. So for like young people who wanted to go into law, or people who wanted to know more about law, I always tried to find out opportunities for me to be able to share what I do, or what I have done, or learn from my experiences, because it's so important that law is diverse and different, and isn't the same kind of image that it's had, for years, 50, 60 years. So for me, it's always about trying to change society by helping young people to think about law, and to try and get them into law so that they can make their own way in it.
Mm-hmm. What have you found hardest about being a lawyer?
Gosh, you really ask some questions, don't you? I mean, I think initially, law is very challenging mentally, and it's very competitive. So if you really want it, you have to kind of be quite a driven individual, and just really stubborn, because you have to go for work experiences. You've got to try and find contacts. You've got to get the right grades. I mean, it's quite trying. But not just that, when you slightly get further on in your career, you've got other obstacles which are not so easy. So initially you could control things like your grades, and you could control things like your work placements, because you could apply and you could keep pushing that through. But there are some things that you can't control, for example, promotions, or clients that you might get, or opportunities, or whatever it might be. That's more difficult when you're in the system of trying to work your way up. And I think mid-career and now, I sometimes I still struggle trying to understand the choices that people make in terms of me being promoted, or me taking opportunities. Those things are really hard for me, because I sometimes I don't understand the reason why I've been looked over for the fourth time, or why I can't go and business develop with a client, why I've been shut out of a certain opportunity. For me, that's the hardest thing, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of things that I want to pick out of that. The first of which is you're talking about how you have to be incredibly driven. Where do you think that drive comes from for you? Again, is it something you feel you've always had, or something that you've developed over time?
I think I've always been like that, to be honest, but only in particular things. So I can be quite a lazy person, and really I can, and I can procrastinate on certain things, and can be very indecisive. But I don't know why with law it's always been not like a calling. I don't want to use words like a calling, but it's always been something that's been very clear and simple to me, and I've always wanted to drive and really push myself in that area, because it's something I love and I'm passionate about. So that's probably, it's always been the case with law. Other things I probably struggle with, like exercise, I'm like pretty bad, like really bad. Not driven at all. So I think it's, for me, I think it's just law. It's just always been a love and an interest.
Mm-hmm. You're also talking about how there's these experiences where you get passed over, or there's an obstacle, or maybe not the opportunity that you were looking for. When you come across these setbacks and these challenges in life, how would you deal with them?
It's a hard one, because I'm not the sort, if I'm honest, I'm not the sort of person to kind of stew in my own pity. It's not my thing. I don't kind of kick myself and say, oh, why has this happened to me? And kind of like, woe is me kind of person. I'm not that at all. I think the way that I tend to try and deal with it is think objectively, and think, how can I make myself better, or upskill, or do what's necessary for me, for that not to happen again. So I'm always the sort of person that will try and get things back into my control, right? So if something's missing, then what can I do to fix it? Obviously, there will be times where it's not down to me and there's nothing that I can do. And I struggle with those scenarios because then what else could I do? What else can I do? So I've noticed I have a real control issue. But so I struggle. I do struggle with things which I can't control. And the best thing I try to do is then, I'm very much a spiritual person, so I'll leave it to God, for example, to just take the reins, and I can't do anything about it, and just leave him to work with that, because I've done the best I can. So
I think that's a really important distinction between what you can control and what you can't control. And I think that's something that we've been learning more than ever over the last few months, with so many things being outside of our control. And one of the things that I find myself coming back to again and again with the people that I work with and the seminars that I run is this idea of it's, I don't know what you call the diagram. It's not a Venn diagram, but it's like a circle with within a larger circle.
Yeah.
And the inner circle is all the stuff you can control.
Yeah.
And the outer circle is all the stuff that you can influence. So I prefer wording it that way, in terms of all the things that you can control: the time you go to bed, what you put in your mouth, and when you choose to work, and all those kind of things. And then the stuff that you can influence is maybe things like your relationships with your colleagues and things like that, where you can't control what someone thinks, but by the way that you treat them, you can perhaps influence the way that you think. And there's almost like a half circle outside of that, which is like the real stuff you don't have much influence over, things like weather, things like pandemics, things like political election results. Yes, of course, you get one vote, but you can't really control all of the other votes from everyone else in the country. So you've got these kind of expanding circles. And one of the sort of examples that I give living in Scotland, and in particular Glasgow, is if you allow the weather to dictate whether you have a good day or not, you're going to have a lot of bad days. This is the wettest part of the United Kingdom here. So if you allow the weather, which is something you can't control, to influence you, you're forever going to be caught in this cycle of feeling helpless and feeling like the world is against you. Whereas if you sit, like I'm looking out the window right now and it's a rainy day today. So I've said, well, what a great day to be doing podcast interviews. I can sit in the house and I can speak to people over the wonderful medium of Zoom, and I don't have to go out and get wet. So I think making this distinction between here's what I can control, here's what I can influence, and here's the stuff that is just completely outside of my control, and only focusing on that really inner circle and being mindful of maybe that second circle is the way to go.
That's a good way to look at it. Really great way to look at it. Love that. Love that.
There you go. You can take that with you today, Egbe. Let's return to law again. And I can't remember if you said it directly, but one of the things that I always associate with law is this idea of critical thinking and having this really sort of rational, almost like clinical approach to looking at issues and looking at decisions. Do you feel there's anything that you've picked up from your law process that transfers into how you approach things in your everyday life?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe a little bit too much. Because I think so. So you're right. So that kind of critical, objective rational thinking, let's go with that, is something that I do all the time. I'm not really, it sounds a bit terrible, doesn't it? But I'm not really an emotive individual. And even my husband will sit there and say, you see things very much black and white. With you, there's no more shades of grey. And that's very true. To me, there's a problem or an issue. For example, say, I don't know, moving house or whatever it might be. What do I need to get through that challenge and issue? And what steps do I need to take? And what things might influence that? And you can't do that all the time. For example, if a friend is having a problem, I will use the same sort of thinking, but maybe my friend doesn't need a solution and a process. And maybe what they need is just me to listen and say, it's okay, and I hear what you're saying. And that has taken me a long time to learn. because I'm just one of those people that just always want to help, and I want to get them through it and see and let them know that there's something on the other side of this problem, but that's not always appropriate.
I have the exact same problem in that I always want to solve problems. So if somebody's describing their problem to me, I always want to say, well, have you tried this? And oh, I recommend this. Here's a good book that you should read. And my wife, bless her, gets this more than anyone else. And sometimes she just wants to have a rant and just be listened to. And that's actually the solution. The solution is just being listened to. We don't need to do anything about it. We don't need to like wave the magic wand. So yeah, maybe I would have made a good lawyer in that case.
The funny thing is also when I think I'm with your wife, there are some scenarios where I just want to have a rant.
Yeah.
Like, oh well, why don't you send a complaint letter or what? And I'm like, no, this is an outrage. I just want to have a rant. So I completely get where she's coming from. I do, really do.
We've explored kind of the beginning of your law career, and you said, well, I had to really just sort of do the grunt work and kind of work my way up and learn my trade. Would you like to describe a little bit more about where the journey took you next?
Yeah, so I ended up this is just like the weirdest. I ended up working at a global law firm, which was just, I mean, it wasn't in my radar. It wasn't on any sort, like I didn't think I would be able to at any point achieve this because of my education and where I was from and all the rest of it. And it was just a different world. It was like, Suits. That's exactly how it was. Okay, so it wasn't like ultra glamorous every day, but it was that kind of fast-paced, kind of, big wig, running around corridors, trying to get stuff done really quickly, currying stuff everywhere. It was so fast-paced, and I absolutely loved it. But mentally, oh my goodness, it like I'm a strong person, but that challenged me. Like, you've got to be the most strong and stubborn individual to be able to work somewhere like that for a long period of time. And hats off to anybody who's done it, or I don't know how they do it. It's just so intense. And but I say that, but it also made me a better lawyer for sure, because when they have that saying, what doesn't kill
you makes you stronger.
There we go. That's exactly what I thought when I was working there. It's not killing me, so I'm getting stronger. But no, genuinely, I jest. But it was one of the best experiences I've had, and it's made me such a good lawyer. And my skills were just sharpened so much there, because you're surrounded by people who are the best at what they do, on top of their game 24/7. So it just makes you kind of like, right, I need to either sink or swim, and I was determined to swim. So that was a rather fun part of my career.
Just because you mentioned Suits, I love Suits. I like to joke that I knew Meghan Markle before she was a princess. Like, I knew her from Suits before she got really famous. What Suits character do you feel you resonate with the most?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a hard one. I don't think I resonate with any of them, to be honest. Do you know what? Genuinely, I don't think I resonate with any of them. Because they just always seem to have it, well, like everything is sorted, right? So there's always this issue, but somehow they sort it out, and then that's not me. Like, I'm that person that's like, what are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? I'm panicking in the back. I mean, not any of them, I don't think. That's really bad, isn't it?
Just have to make up a whole new character and slot you into the franchise.
I don't think I'd be a great character. Oh dear.
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who feel that they're in a fast-paced setting. They either run their own business or they do work in that sort of fast-paced kind of corporate environment. And perhaps even just over the last few months, they feel that their job dynamic has changed a lot, because it's a lot harder to get things done, and they're having to adapt to this sort of new virtual and remote working that we're doing. Do you have any advice for how you kind of keep up with a fast pace?
Oh, That's a good question. I mean, I think you're not going to last long if you don't put red lines in the sand, right? So I think I had to learn this within the first 6 months. When you're trying to keep that fast pace and try to do 6 million things at once, I think there has to come a point where you kind of step back and say, right, let me breathe. Because I didn't do that for the first 6 months. And I think I nearly had a mental breakdown. Like, genuinely, my husband had to take me, told me to take a day off. And we basically went like to the coast and we just spent time just getting back to nature. And that made me so much better. But I think I was running myself into the ground because I hadn't put those lines in the sand where I was kind of like, I'm not going to do this now. It's 3:30 in the morning. I need to sleep, right? So I would say red lines, boundaries, whatever you want to call them, are essential so that you can survive or get better at doing what you're doing. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Is that red lines in terms of the work that you're doing, or is it more about red lines in terms of setting boundaries with other people?
Oh, always boundaries with other people. I mean, I've noticed that when you have control over your own actions, then it's not as bad, but it's other people. You've got this like set agenda, right? And then all these other people keep throwing stuff at you and you're like, hang on, I had my agenda here, right? So it's those boundaries with those individuals, and it can be the hardest because you have to, let them down, inverted commas, or tell them to push something back, or you can't get that shipment out, or whatever it might be. But those boundaries with other people are really, really important. And I've come across in business, other business owners who are so good at setting those boundaries. And every time they do that with me, I'm like, wow. No, I don't think, oh, why can't she do that? Or why can't he do that? I think, yes, you're right. It is 7 p.m. or whatever, 11 p.m. at night. Maybe I don't need this now. Maybe I can wait until the morning. And I respect them even more so because they have said, look, this is my boundary. I don't work on Fridays or I don't work after 11. I will get back to you in the morning. And I'm like, yes, that's what I should be doing. So I learned from them. I always learn from them as well. So yeah, definitely others. Boundaries with other people. Really important.
So that was quite a fast pace, and you came out of the fast pace eventually. What was the next step?
So I ended up working, I still do actually, while I do my consultancy. I work in-house, and so that's more of a slower pace, but a different challenge, right? So slightly more senior, which is great, but that slower pace I had to get used to, because when you're used to living like a ridiculous person where you're just constantly on the go like a hamster, that all of a sudden I was like, oh, what do I do now? I've got all this time. So I've learned to kind of rein it in slightly and do the best that I can at my job, but while also pursuing other interests such as the consultancy.
Mm-hmm. So what does your consultancy work involve?
So that the main emphasis is to help small businesses and entrepreneurs. So at the moment, their legal options are either to go to a law firm or just do it themselves and just go on Google and copy and paste and hope for the best. And no, genuinely. So I thought this doesn't really make any sense. And the funny thing is, I started the consultancy during the pandemic because I had people coming to me saying, oh my goodness, someone's just cut my contract. What can I do? Can they terminate this? Can they terminate me from this? Or I'm being furloughed. Can you help me? And it made sense to me to be able to provide that third option where you're getting the skills of a lawyer who's come from wherever I've come from and the knowledge with all the knowledge that I have, but you don't have to pay the law firm prices and you don't have to worry about cutting and pasting from Google. So I was kind of like in between the middle. So that was my offering, and I helped them work through things like contractual problems, GDPR, IP, anything that they need in terms of getting their business to progress really well or to scale.
Not too sure how much detail you'll be able to share with me, but I'll ask the question and you can share what you can.
Okay.
I'm sure you have a horror story or two of the copy and paste job gone wrong. Is there any anecdote that you're able to share with us that might be an amusing warning to people who want to try and do the same?
Oh, there's so many. Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, there was. I'm laughing because this is really funny. There was a client who said, "Oh, he ran a kind of middle of the road kind of product based business, right? So just normal, sold and all sorts, right? So I was reading his contract, and it kept referring to like random things, like if you do the following, then you'll be sued. And so basically, what he had copy and pasted into his contract was for like this. How can I put it in the best way? Lifestyle business. That hang on. How can I put it? So like what's the best way to put it? So those companies that are like maybe do a bit of lingerie or a bit of other things, let me put it like that. He had copied and pasted that into his contract. So I was like, where did you get this from? Because it doesn't make sense. You're talking about certain things that you shouldn't really be talking about. And he was like, what do you mean? So I showed him the clauses, and he was like, oh, I got it from a friend. She said it was fine. And I'm like, what does she run? And then he explained that she runs a lingerie company. And I said, that's very specific to her, but not for your business. So you might want to think about taking out some of these clauses that refer to refunds back off your contract, because it doesn't work, and your clients will actually be quite concerned at what you've been doing. So that's I think that was a simple mistake, in that if you are going to copy and paste, which I wouldn't advise, please read it before you put it in there. So yeah, that wasn't the best day, but yeah.
Going back to what you were saying right at the beginning, you were talking about how you went into law for this sense of justice. Do you feel that you are able to serve justice more now than you were at the beginning of your career?
I think so, definitely. I think so. Mainly because now that I've reached a certain point in my career where I've had a certain amount of experiences and I've been at different places, the view or the pool that I have is wider than I had at the beginning of my career. At the beginning of my career, I think I was just a deer in headlights and had no clue. Although I could have maybe changed things in my own small way, I think now I understand or have skills that I didn't have at the start of my career that allows me to be able to reach certain circles or talk to certain people or try to push certain agendas that I might not have done at the start of my career.
What do you think is the next step for you in your career?
It's a good question. Normally I would say I have a 5-year plan. But I think with the pandemic and everything else, I hadn't envisioned even starting my consultancy like 6 months ago. And it came out of nowhere and is flourishing, which is amazing. So I have taken the viewpoint that I'm going to try and be flexible for the next 2 to 3 years and just see where life takes me. I've always been this person that, I've got to achieve this by this age, and I've got to do this by this time. And I think I'm at a stage where I would prefer to kind of take stock and just enjoy the next couple of years and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you mentioned that the pandemic has kind of created this new pursuit for you, and that there's several people who I've spoken to who have said the same thing, that actually the pandemic's kind of the best thing that could have happened to them, which always sounds like a horrible thing to say, but just from a kind of personal point of view. And to be honest, I have kind of felt like that myself, and I've had the exact same guilt of saying, well, actually, the pandemic in a lot of ways has like really helped me out and sort of really kind of suited me personally. Like I've just started a project in pandemic where people really got caught out with the kind of the virtual communication and the virtual work, and I've been doing that for years. And so I've been helping people with public speaking and communication on the virtual platform.
Yeah.
And that has really like blown up because there's been such a demand and an interest in it. And that's actually like my number one project now. And that did not exist in March. It did not exist well into the start of this year. So it's weird how, so I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think Uber's one of them. So many big businesses are started in recessions. Like I'm pretty sure Uber was started in the sort of the depths of the kind of the credit crunch and the financial crisis. It's odd how sometimes a crisis provides an opportunity for other people, and it seems that we've actually both benefited from that during this time.
It's strange, isn't it, that there's like I think it's a good in a way. I mean, if you can not it's like not sort of opportunity, is it? But if you can make the best of it that you can, then I think there's nothing wrong with that. And if anything, it's a good thing because it's going to impact people in a positive way.
Yeah. I'd like to begin to transition our conversation now, Egbe, and we've been talking about justice a lot, and obviously with justice we have injustice. And the whole attention on the Black Lives Matter movement in recent times has really come from this sense of injustice and this fuel of injustice. And I was really looking forward to this interview because I feel you've got such a unique perspective on this idea of justice and injustice through your experience in law. So to kind of begin this conversation, are there any experiences of racism that you've had personally, or it could be somebody else's experience that you'd want to share with us on this interview today?
Oh, such a shame, but I have to say yes. Yeah, so my one experience that I had was at university, and I never really come across it in terms of so in your face, but that was one time that I did. And I'd been coming back late with friends from London, and my university is on the outskirts of London, so we were in central London, and we were heading back. And we were near our halls of residence, and out of nowhere, we hear a screech of tyres, and I was with maybe 3 boys and maybe another girlfriend. And out of nowhere, these screech of tyres come along, and my friend just says, there are these guys that are coming at us. And I turned around, I had things happen so quickly. And he said to me, just run, like run as fast as you can. And I'm like, what, why? And you know what, I'm like always about processing things. Like, why do I need to do what I'm doing? And he was like, you just need to run. And these guys came out of nowhere with baseball bats. And I was like, what is going on? So I ran, and just like, I've never run so hard in my life. And my friends that were guys were standing their ground, and I was just like, oh gosh, please do not, like. And I think they realised that there were just too many of them, so they also started running. But the fear that I had it's just insane. Like I couldn't like when we got back to halls, we finally ran back to halls, and I said to them, what happened? And they were like, and it was really sad because my male friends were kind of like, it's just one of those things. I'm like having a panic attack, like what has just happened? And they're like, yeah, just, it's one of those things, as if it happens to them all the time. And I couldn't understand. Like, part of me was like, okay, should I resign myself to the fact that this is just part of my life, or should I, say that this is wrong? Should we go to the police and say, look, we've just been chased by some youths, and my male friends were just like, there's no point. I mean, can you give them a description? Can you, tell them what they look like, what they were driving? And I was like, you're right, I can't. So that was the first time where I was kind of a bit shocked that could happen. And I mean, this was maybe 2000, and we're talking like mid 2000s. So I couldn't, I was just in shock, absolute shock.
Mm-hmm. So for kind of the dynamics of your friendship group, are you all black? Was it just yourself who was black with white friends? Was it kind of like a mix of white and black? What was the kind of dynamics?
So we were all black, and we had just attended an Afro-Caribbean society kind of like comedy night. So it's that event is mainly targeted towards Afro-Caribbean students, and it was done with other universities in central London. And so we were all of us were black at the time. I haven't changed. We still are. But yeah, so we were all black at the time. Well, we were all black. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying at the time. Or I'm going to be different.
That's, I mean, terrifying. Firstly, is the obvious reaction there, and then you look at that and you think, is that premeditated? Are they driving around looking for somebody to vent on, or is it more of an opportunistic? They're driving along and then they just react. It's almost thinking of what is the type of psychology of someone who would do that kind of thing, which is, I think that's one of the many sort of struggles and issues that is coming out of this is, what is the psychology of people who are racist or do discriminate, and how do you get through to that type of psychology? Like, if they're driving around looking for some black people to beat up, like how do you even begin to reach past that kind of intolerance?
I think part of me always thinks that there has to be somehow someone got to that place. So surely there must be a way that they can get back, right, to normality, or what we would call normal. But then as I've grown older, I mean, just some people are always going to be the way they are, and I think I spent a lot of my early, when I say my 20s, for example, trying to change people's minds. Like, to me, if you found out more about me and the fact that I'm, a really normal person, I have the same gripes and issues and, hang-ups as anybody else, right? So then therefore, why can't we connect then? Why does race have to be this dividing thing? Under my skin color, I have the same lungs as you, I breathe the same way. I mean, the only thing that might be different is the fact that, I might listen to certain music, or I might, celebrate certain festivals. That's it, So yeah, I even now I'm still an optimist. I still think that everybody's reachable. But my cynicism sometimes tells me, that might not always be the case.
Mm-hmm. Looking at, we've talked about your career a lot in terms of lots of other different factors of your career, but one of the things we didn't really talk about is the race aspects of your career, in terms of you, because of the color of your skin, you face certain obstacles that perhaps other people in the profession don't. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about in terms of sort of institutional racism that you feel is important to make people aware of?
I think for me, it's probably different depending on the stage of your career. For example, some people will struggle to become a lawyer in the first place, right? So to get that training contract and to train to become a lawyer. For me, I think the biggest hurdle that I have faced in my career is around looking at where I'm going in terms of seniority, right? So at firms that I've worked at, I remember there being maybe one, if you're lucky, black partner. And that one black partner would be, what I would say, rolled out at diversity events, right? Or if there was like a certain client from a certain part of the world, they'll be rolled out again. And for me, I just struggle to see myself becoming a partner or becoming a senior leader in an organization, because I didn't see somebody like me there, and that's what I struggled with. And part of me has always said, well, maybe you could be the groundbreaker, and maybe things have changed and people are more kind of aware, so maybe these issues are not as bad as you think they are. But then the years go by and there's still that one black partner everywhere you go, or no partner at all, or no senior leader or executive that's BAME or black or whatever. And I struggle with that. I do, because I think to myself, how are the younger generation expected to, think about reaching those heights if there's nobody there like them? You know, isn't it that? I mean, hopefully you'll know this, David. Isn't it what you are, what you see, or something? There's a saying where people, I can't
Yeah,
remember something along those
I
lines.
know the one you mean. I can't quite think of it at the moment.
Yeah, but if people don't see it, they won't believe it. They won't see themselves there, and that's really hard for me because I want that to change. I really do.
As you're describing that, I thought of it in a slightly different way. Of perhaps I've more traditionally seen racism or institutional racism as this kind of top-down thing, where the people at top stop you from coming up. So it's almost like this obstacle, and if we just stop that, then everyone can kind of rise up. But what I'm also hearing as you're describing that is this bottom-up aspect of actually there's this mentality that develops where you don't then see yourself in that position, you don't aspire for that position, and then you don't reach for that position or work towards that position. Like, do you think like both of those forces are still there, or do you think it's almost like that mindset thing that's perhaps stronger now?
No, if I'm honest, I think one feeds into the other. So because you have that top-down approach, it means that it stifles anyone from coming up to the top, right? Because they're stifling that progress. But because then you're stifling that progress, it means that people who are coming up can not see anybody like them up there. So they're thinking, well, it's not doable. It's like the same with, like, for example, Barack Obama, right? So there was a lot of opposition. I'm not going to say all of it was racist. It wasn't. Some people just don't like his views. Fair point. But there was a lot of rhetoric, for example, in the papers and from other politicians about Obama, where he was from, and all the rest of it, right? So you have individuals that are trying to stifle him from being in that position or getting to that position. But then if he doesn't make it, then you've got young people, whoever it might be, looking up, thinking, right, well, I can't be president because there's nobody else out there that looks like a president or has become president, for example. But as soon as he broke through that and became president, literally overnight, I remember that feeling where people around me were just like, yeah, like, let's do this in the UK. Like, why can't we have a black prime minister? Or why can't we have someone in the UN or someone, like, people that all of a sudden, all of the limits that I feel every day were just gone. Because it's possible, right? Now I can see that maybe one day, if I work hard, maybe I can get there, But if you don't have that person breaking through, you kind of get into this mindset where you think, what's the point? Regardless of what I do, I'm never going to reach there because the forces above will not allow it.
Mm-hmm. I think Obama's an interesting example and talking point here, because what I've seen in the many comment threads online is people kind of say, well, what about Obama? Well, Obama became president of the US, so why can't any black person or African American get to any position of power? I feel it's almost rolled out as like as an exception that proves the rule, rather than like it is just an exception. There's been 45 presidents of the US, 0 women, 44 white dudes, 1 black dude. Like that's not diversity. That's just an exception. What would you kind of say to? I guess I've sort of said it a little bit already, but for people who do say, yeah, but what about Obama? And yeah, these barriers are breaking down. Like, are they really breaking down? Like, has there been any progress? And if they are still there, why are they still existing?
I think I'd agree. Joyce, I would totally agree with you. I think there are still barriers, and it's very easy and convenient to kind of say, oh, well, there's Obama, and there's such and such in the legal system, or there's such and such on TV, or on they play for. There's loads of people that play for England now, so there's no racism in football. I mean, I think what I would say to that is, there's always exceptions, as we've discussed, but also I've noticed racism takes a back seat when it's convenient. So say, for example, we go out to the World Cup and we've got like a squad who, you've had quite a few black players on there or BAME players on there. Everyone's like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's, pushing those boundaries forward. But as soon as, somebody does something wrong, for example, not Jermaine Defoe. Who is it? Jermaine Defoe? There was a player that had a tattoo on his leg, and as soon as there was an element of negativity or something that was, not what they thought it should be, it was, certain language was used against him. But hang on, he was the guy that was scoring your goals, like, in the last World Cup. Now all of a sudden you want to jump on him and say he's this and he's that and everything else. So I think it's always convenient to say that there's been progress when it works for individuals or for society. But what they forget is there are plenty of times where those boundaries are kept strong because it's not convenient for those individuals for those boundaries to move.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the Black Lives Matter discussion has been missing in the past couple of months?
For me, I think it's slightly different depending on where you are, right? So in the US, I think they have a whole different kettle of fish over there that is endemic and is just difficult, is the best way I can describe it. In the UK, what I think is missing is conversation from the powers that be, right? So we've seen, people in Bristol, and we've seen people, protest. What I haven't seen, and I don't know, maybe it's because we could say it's the pandemic, the government are busy doing whatever they're doing, but I haven't seen that conversation, an open, frank discussion from the powers that be, for example, politicians or from leading figures in the public eye. I just haven't seen that. You know what, there's a problem here. What can we do to change that? There's something simple such as that. It's just been, there's been protesters and, they haven't been keeping their 2-meter distance. And that's important, of course it is. But there's a reason why people have come out of their house to protest, because it's because they feel so strongly about something. Doesn't it warrant an opportunity to be able to discuss what that problem is and how we can work through it? And that problem has been going on for ages, for decades, and no one has sat there. There's always been these different inquiries, and the government always says, "Oh, we'll change, we'll make it different," but nothing ever changes. And I think it's so. Sometimes I feel so heartened because I'll go to Facebook pages, or I'll go to activist meetings, and the people that are talking are not just Black people, they're white, Chinese, Asian, and there's like a cross section of the community who are really behind this. But that's the community. Where is that same talk and openness and progression in the powers that be? Where is that? For me, that's what's been missing. Where's that voice? Where's that direction?
Mm-hmm. Kind of goes back to that discussion of top down and bottom up. And I think maybe what's been happening in the last couple of months is there's more bottom up stuff.
Yes.
Of you have the protests, you have the awareness, you have, businesses doing this, that, and the other thing. And it's kind of sort of trickling up. But ultimately, when you look right at the top, is much coming down apart from, yes, that we agree that Black Lives Matter. That's the sort of kind of soundbite that you put out into the world.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it's I mean, I can see why sometimes people say that they have a certain not laziness, but just don't really care, or apathy, maybe I should say, about politics or about changing society, because they just see it as nobody's listening. So why should I go out and vote, for example, if nobody's listening? And I always come back and say, oh, well, if we all say that, then nobody's going to vote, and the same thing is going to carry on. But I can understand their viewpoint, because politicians, whoever it might be, they're just missing from the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think also you were talking about the protest there. Something that I think's been unfortunate in the UK and probably similar elsewhere in the world is that for some reason coronavirus seems to affect BAME people more than white people. I don't know if that's a socioeconomic factor. I don't know if it's a very deep genetic factor or something. So you've got this situation where you've got protesters who are still predominantly Black. There are white supporters there, but you've got protesters who are coming out who are then more at risk environmentally because of the virus, and then also for some reason, whatever it is, they also seem kind of physiologically to be more prone to the virus. So it's almost like a double whammy of, you've got this intolerance that you want to protest about, and you've got like more of a health risk from the virus from whatever reason. I think that's been sort of like a really sort of like shitty hand that's been dealt. I don't think there's really another way to say it with the protests recently.
It's not been easy, I don't think. But I think it's just, yeah, I don't know what to add, to be honest. It's just a sad state of affairs.
We were talking there about how there's this more of like a community gathering, and I think you were talking about optimism earlier, and I think something that is more optimistic is there seems to be more of a widespread support. Like it's not just a black issue. There are white people getting involved. There's mixed race people getting involved. There's other races, brown and every other color in the world is kind of getting involved in this. I think that is encouraging. And I know for me, certainly as a white person, I've been thinking about, well, I want to support the issue, but I haven't necessarily known the best way to go about it. And this kind of podcast series is sort of the answer I decided upon. For people like myself who are white supporters and they want to help and they want to contribute, do you have any suggestions for how they can best do that?
I think just acknowledging that there's an issue, I think, is always a good start, I think. But I found, even for me, I found reading certain books quite helpful. There's obviously a big one by Renee. Her surname's gone out of my head, but she's Why I'm No Longer Talking About Race. That was her book, and there's been a couple of books that have come through which I think help to give a different perspective, because most people don't sit there and try and have an unconscious bias against somebody else, right, or racist against somebody else. Most people don't, right? And reading or educating yourself about the issues that others face can only be a good thing, right? So that you're more aware of things and more sensitive to certain things, or the way that you speak to somebody, or the way that you address somebody, or why they may be feeling strongly about certain issues. So education is so important. And then if you feel like, I want to go that step further and I've educated myself, then there are plenty of charities that are feeding through ideas and financials to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I've known several friends that have opted to go down that route of making a one-off donation or a constant donation. So there's all sorts of different ways of getting involved, but I just think it just depends on the individual.
You were talking about change coming from the top, and that's ultimately what's really got to happen here. Is we can talk about it and we can raise awareness about it, but what's actually going to change? Do you have any solutions that you would like to see start coming about? What do you think are some of the things that we can do that can actually change this situation?
That's a hard one, isn't it? I mean, so are we talking from like a professional perspective or personal or both?
Yeah, go for both if you've got different answers.
I mean, I think professionally, I think being aware of your colleagues who are BAME, for example, or people that you interact with that are BAME, and say, for example, like I had a client who came to me and said, I put together an event, and I looked at my list. This was around Black Lives Matter, and all the people that I've got on there are white. And I said, oh, that's not a problem, as long as as long as they were the best people, or the most, people that kind of knew about their topic. It is what it is, right? And she said, oh no, I didn't really. I just I kind of contacted certain people, and because they were easy to contact, that's why they're on the panel. And I said, well, have you thought about maybe putting something out there on Facebook or your network so that you can get a more kind of diverse, look? Because just because we're a different race doesn't mean that we're not specialists in certain areas, right? So if you have a legal event, then put it on a web or whatever it might be, network, and ask people, look, I want the best people for this type of law, and then see what comes in, right? But we can't put ourselves forward if we don't know about it. If you're only contacting certain people, I might not be in your group, right? So how do I get that opportunity to be part of your talk, which might lead to more clients or whatever it might be? And from a personal perspective, I think, I've had this question from some of my friends who are white, and they say, oh, what can we do to change things? Like, what's the best way? And I don't think there's any one single answer that kind of neatly, solves it. I think it's a combination of awareness, education, and activism. If you feel strongly about something, then join the protests. If you and try and change that way, try and raise up the agenda, try and put together a petition and get loads of people to sign it, or send a letter to your MP. All of us can do things to try and change it, right? I don't know if it will solve it, but at least if we try and change it in our own small way, then at least we know that we've done our best.
Mm-hmm. As a kind of anecdotal add-on to what you're saying, I think this idea of like awareness of opportunity is quite an important thing you've highlighted there. When I was looking, again, kind of coming back to the podcast, sort of beginning of June, I was looking at saying, well, like, am I as diverse and inclusive as I kind of hope that I am and credit myself to be? And I looked at my podcast episodes, and I think I had, was it 66 interviews that I've done? 63 of my guests have been white. I've had one black guest, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm not diverse at all. It's one of these things, like, it's not intentional, but I think you fall into that habit of, like you said, I actually resonated with that story. Well, I just contact people that I know.
Yeah.
And with my white background, I naturally just know more white people. So with this series, it was just a case of advertising. I'm looking for black guests and making it sort of specific. And in this series now, I've got 4 black guests. Now that's still not great, because I've now had 5 black guests out of a total of 70. So the work's not done. The work's not done yet. But just by kind of advertising it and making the opportunity sort of more apparent, I was able to find great black guests.
Yeah.
So I think what you said there, just this awareness of how we advertise opportunities, there's something in that, and that seems to me quite an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Compared to some of the other changes which might seem a lot more difficult, that seems to me like an easy step that we can all sort of do.
Yeah. And that it's like the butterfly effect, isn't it? So maybe somebody appearing on your podcast might get certain opportunities from something else, and it all kind of spirals and rolls, right? But if you don't have that initially, then it's just going to be the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would like share with our audience, or make people aware of in regards to Black Lives Matter that you think we maybe haven't touched upon or discussed yet?
Just to say that I think it's positive, right? And I see it all as positive. Okay, so we have challenges, and we've discussed them, previously. But I think for me, it's encouraging, as I said before, to see people of all different races trying to look at themselves, look at what they do, and trying to change their own circle. And I think the more that people do that, the more likely that lasting change is going to happen. And Black Lives Matter is not just like a June, July, August thing, or a pandemic thing, right? And then everybody goes back to their own, back to their ways. It should be something that continues, and continues to inspire people, so that young people have a different experience than what we've had.
Mm-hmm. So, Egbe, I'd like to start bringing everything we've been talking about today full circle. And to do this, I want to kind of switch the script a little bit in terms of, I've been the one asking questions throughout our conversations today, but I actually want to give the last question to you.
Oh, can I ask you something?
If you want, that's not what I was planning.
Sorry.
But you can if you want. So my first invitation is there a question that you would like to ask our audience today, or you think the audience should be asking themselves?
Oh, that's a good question. I would ask them, how do they think they can provide something positive towards the Black Lives Matter movement? That's what I would say. What can they do that they think will change, help change their own circle, or what they do to be a positive change for Black Lives Matter?
And since you mentioned it, do you have a question that you'd like to ask me?
I'll behave. No, I'll behave. But actually, I have half a question if that helps.
Yeah, go for it.
I obviously do my research, right? And you have like this amazing story. Okay, what is the one thing you say or circumstance that has changed you to make you see things as positively as you do? Sorry, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I've got the answer, I think. So you mentioned my story. You've done your research. Clearly, you know that I lost my dad to cancer, and that created this kind of big shift for me. It scared the shit out of me, to be honest, a little bit, and I started kind of taking life a lot more seriously. But the way that you worded that question, why do you see things so positively? And I think that it comes back to my wife. We were talking about my wife earlier, that I'll use the word dating. It wasn't even like that serious. I started seeing my wife just before my dad died. And I had this very sort of strange experience of losing one special person in my life and simultaneously gaining another. And there was just this sort of this sense from very early on in our relationship that we both kind of knew that this was it, and we both knew that it was going towards marriage and family and, you know, lifelong partnership and everything else. And I think that has actually, I could have potentially lost my dad and sort of been overcome by the grief and had a sort of really tough time with it. I don't think I would have, to be fair, because it's natural to lose a parent. Like, your parent should die before you. So in some sense, there's a natural order to things there. But I think the way that it happened, and simultaneously kind of having my wife come into my life at the same time, it sort of, it showed me that life like really is good at the end of the day, and like tough stuff happen, and you have challenges and obstacles and you go through pain, but actually like life is a net positive, and there are far more things to enjoy in your life and far more that you can take from life than life will ever take away from you. So I think that's actually why I've got such a positive outlook on life. And I probably haven't fully realized that, or certainly not fully articulated it actually until you asked that question. So I think that kind of restored my hope in life if I was ever going to kind of lose my faith in life, that actually like life is good overall, and that just made sure that I didn't forget it.
Oh, it's really sad, but I had a tear in my eye when you were telling me. Oh goodness, that's lovely.
Thank you. Well, a very good question, actually. So thank you for kind of making me think about my own story a little bit even more and getting some extra insight. So there we go. I actually said before we started recording that I do intend for this to kind of open up a space between the two of us, and lots of interesting things come out. And I usually expect it's from my guest rather than from me, but I had a little interesting tidbit there too. So Egbe, for people who've been listening to our conversation today and they've resonated with your story, with your work, maybe they're copy and pasting their legal documents and thinking, shit, I should probably stop doing that. Where would you suggest for people to go to find out a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
So either my website, which is mantonlegal.co.uk, or Instagram, where it's at Egbe Manton, EGBEMANTON.
Well, Egbe, I'd just like to thank you for coming on the podcast. I must say, you are the most laid-back lawyer that I think I've ever met. That some lawyers, and I'm sure you know them and work with them, can be kind of pretty uptight and full of themselves, or very sort of kind of clinical and professional. This is how we do things. But you just seem like pretty chilled and relaxed, whilst also kind of like knowing your stuff at the same time. So I've really connected with that and enjoyed speaking to you today because of that.
Oh, thank you, David.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.